weren't able to be here tonight. Okay, so it's now recorded. So my son really wanted to move to Florida. He was excited about it. He wanted a new start. And he was gung-ho for about 3.5 months. And then it started to get really tough. And it was a lot harder for him than he thought it was going to be. And after about 4 or 5 months, he started sliding into a little bit of like depression and lots of video gaming. And he was connecting with his friends back in Minnesota, which was kind of a lifeline for him. But at the same time, as a mom, and especially a mom who like studies technology and teens, I was, trying to put some healthy boundaries on. And we had a house rule that said you're off the computer at that point anyway, after 2 hours. And so one night in particular, I walk over and I was like, hey, and he did give me permission to share this story. Nate, could you get off the computer? And time is up. Totally ignores me. Nothing, no response, right? And so I walk over and I'm doing like all my best parenting skills that like we teach in workshops and stuff like that. And I go over and I'm like eye contact, or at least trying to get eye contact, and tap him on the shoulder and say, if you don't get off, I'm going to have to give you a consequence. And still no response. So I go over to the garage, I open up the panel, and I click off the power to his room. He comes storming out of his room. All of a sudden, I'm getting a response, right? And he is no little guy. He is like 6'2", skinny as a rail, but pretty big. Come have a seat. There's a flyer there you can pick up on your way. And so he makes a move to like go past me towards the garage. And I just looked at him and I said, don't even think about it. Right. And thank heavens, he listened at that point. But it was one of the most tense parenting moments of my life. And again, I study this stuff for a living. And I tell you that story for 2 reasons. The first is I want you to know that I know that this technology stuff with our kids is really, really hard. It is the number one issue that parents are talking to me about. Maybe because they know I talk and think about it all the time, but I have a lot of good friends. I work in counseling, psychology, human services. Joy Gabrielle is a counselor that works with adolescents. And the therapists I work with are telling me the backstories that they're getting in their office. And these issues of technology are coming up a lot. So one, I want you to know I'm a mom and I've been there. The second thing I want you to know is that it was actually just this summer, my son came to me and he always thought we were crazy for having limits, right? At all. And he like sat down on the bed and he's like, yeah, mom, I don't really want to tell you this because he's 19 now. And it's like, yeah, but I'm really glad you had those limits. And I am so glad because I did things like work on cars and be creative with engines. And now like I have some hobbies outside of and some life outside of the computer. And this actually matches the research that we're seeing. So Joy Gabrielle, my colleague in Florida, had done focus groups and interviews with teens, and the younger ones, the ones just going into middle school, are like, yeah, we don't need adults, and we know what we're doing, and who needs, we don't need this oversight. And the middle adolescents are kind of like, well, maybe that would be helpful. And the older adolescents are like, man, I wish I had had a little bit more oversight, because I got into some stuff online and saw some stuff that I kind of wish I hadn't. And so that's what the teenagers are telling us, that they wish that they had had a little bit more guidance. And I honestly never thought I would see the day that my son would come to me and tell me that, but it happened. And he did give me permission to share that. So with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit tonight about some of the benefits of social media, We're going to dive into some of the risks. And then we're going to talk about solutions and ways, tips for parents to kind of handle and deal with some of the media. We'll give you some resources, and then we'll open it up for questions. Sound like a plan? All right. I got to wake up my computer here, though. Okay. So, hours that kids spend online. We're going to do a little clapping survey. So, how many hours does your child spend online? For anybody who has a child who doesn't ever get online, clap your hands. Okay. So everybody's in the right spot. How about 1 to 2 hours? How about 3 to 5 hours? How about 5 to 8 hours? 8 plus. Okay. So last week I was in a room where there were kids and parents, and the kids were clapping after the parents were done clapping. So when we the Common Sense Media is a website I'll show you a little bit later, but I really like they do their stuff. They do research, they do parenting articles, they do reviews of a lot of different types of media. And they did a national survey of teenagers, and they said tweens, those who are 8 to 12 years old, they are spending, this is post-pandemic 2021, about 5 1/3 on average hours online, and then listening to music too. So it's anything that's streaming visual or audio to them, podcasts, etc. too. And that does not include the time that they are in school doing or doing homework. So that's outside of any schoolwork that's online. Yeah, that's a lot, right? So if you add the time that they might be online for homework, it could be more. Teens, 8 1/3 hours that they are spending online. So 13 to 18-year-olds on average, more than 8 hours a day of their waking hours online. So that's, and I just, in the pie chart, I just put the waking hours. So it's like there's only 1/3 of their waking hours that are not connected. So that's a lot of influence that they're getting from the online world, right? So if there's one thing you remember from today, I want you to remember this concept of balance, because a lot of our teens and our tweens are out of balance. And it's not that I don't want to come off like I'm against technology or anti-technology. There's a lot of benefits, and teens say that there are a lot of benefits online. But what we're trying to kind of help them think about is having a balance so that their development is balanced in their social life and their physical activity, etc. So teens actually say that they benefit quite a bit from being online. The Pew Research Center does a survey every few years about this topic. And they, teens on that survey have said, you know, the internet helps me to be creative. And I'm creative when I go online. You know, maybe they're making TikTok videos or just interesting Insta posts, photography. There's a lot of things they can be creative with. They also say that it helps them to connect socially. And they say that when they're having a problem, they can get support from other people. So those are some of the top reasons why teens think that internet is really important in their lives. Of course, we know there's also risks, and we'll get into that in more detail in just a minute. But the internet really is neutral. It's what we do when we go online, and it's how we're feeling that gets magnified. So let's say we have 2 teens. We have one teen who just made the basketball team and aced a test, and like the girl they thought is cute, like said, like kind of smiled at them, and they go home and they get online and they're like complimenting their friends and giving shout outs and like they're magnifying their good mood. And the internet really does that. It kind of magnifies what we bring. But we have another teen, and this teen tried out for the school play, and they didn't get the part that they wanted. And then they bombed the same test that the other kid aced. And somebody at lunch shot them this really dirty look and started whispering to the person next to them. And so they come home and they're feeling like kind of insecure. And when they get online, the internet algorithms feed them negativity, and they go down rabbit holes where they find more and more negativity. And so whatever they do going online, it gets magnified. So when I presented this next fact in an auditorium, I've had gasps in the audience, because the research does not show that there is a correlation or an association between screen time and mental health problems in teens. And I think the reason for that is that when you take all those teens who are in a good mood and all those teens who are in a bad mood and you average them out, there's no correlation. And so one of the problems with research, and something to be aware of, is that you're hearing averages most of the time. There was a study, a huge study done just in the last couple of years, 83,000 youth. And they looked not just at the averages, but they looked at subgroups. And they did find that there are subgroups that are at risk for mental health problems. And so I want to tell you some of those, because some of those are your kiddos probably in the ages that they're at. Girls, 11 to 13. When they had high screen time, 1 year later, they reported lower life satisfaction. And we know from other studies that what they're doing, this won't surprise you. I know you like, this is pretty common sense, but they're comparing themselves to other people. And it's an age when they're developing physically, they're going through puberty, they're self-conscious, and they're comparing themselves publicly. And any little mistake that they make is, again, magnified, and can be shared. The speed and spread of what goes on online and is really hard to shut down. Boys, 14 to 15, somebody had a freshman, that transition into high school for boys. They hit puberty a little bit later. And that, again, transitions into middle school and up to high school are tough times. And for the girls, it's harder into middle school. For the guys, it's harder into high school. And then the 19-year-olds, my son's age, somebody here said they had, I think it was Principal Nelson had dropped somebody off at OSU. My son just started there. 19-year-olds, those kids coming out of high school into adulthood, both the male and female students reported that if they were on the internet a lot, lots of screen time, they had low life satisfaction a year later. So we also know that LGBTQ kids are at higher risk if they're on screens a lot. We know older boys of color, Latino, Black, are also higher risk for depression and anxiety if they're on screens a lot. So there are these subgroups that are at risk. And so when you hear like the large corporations or large people saying, oh, well, there's no correlation that there's between mental health, that's what's going on, is that there's certain groups that are more vulnerable than others. All right. So we're going to dive into some of the risks. The first two are ones that Joy and I study a lot. So I'll give you a little bit more detail there. And the last three are a little bit more, it's kind of emerging areas. So mature content. The question I always ask parents, and this may apply more for younger kids than you all's, but would you let an 8-year-old into Grand Central Station and let them wander alone by themselves? And the answer is no, right? Like, we know when we don't want kids wandering around talking to people they don't know, because who knows what could happen. But we do that all the time online, right? And so research does show us that when kids are exposed to mature content, and there are folks who are advertising and to our kids specifically to try to, hook them in young, that they are more likely to take risks in whatever that mature content area is. So I think I actually have a slide. I'm sorry, my slides are backwards. Here's the mature content. Jewel just had a huge settlement. Maybe you heard about this in the news, where they had to pay a ton of money because they had been targeting younger kids with their flavors and their advertisements. The problem is that there are half a dozen copycat companies that have popped up and haven't had to pay a settlement yet. So, so exposure to substance use advertising online and in media has been related to using at younger ages. Okay, back to cyberbullying. And this is an area of research that I've gone into pretty deeply. And with cyberbullying, unlike screen time, which is a little bit more neutral, kids who are cyberbullied, in a study, we call them meta-analyses. It's a study of all of the studies that we could find out there. Though that has shown that cyberbullying is related to suicide ideation, self-harm, cutting. And so that's definitely something to take seriously. And I have tips a little bit later on what to do if your child is cyberbullied. But I wanted to talk briefly about the definition, because in the CDC world, and we all know how sometimes CDC gets their messaging messed up, but they say cyberbullying requires all 6 of these things. But if you ask a teen or parents, they will just tell you that if it's the 3 that are outlined in red, that's what matters. So if it's aggressive behavior between peers that inflicts harm, to them, that's cyberbullying. And the research shows that even that definition is related to harm and anxiety and some of these other negative associations. All right. Social cognition, contagion rather, is another one. And this is particularly among girls. All of us, though, are social in nature. And when we socially share an experience with someone else, it magnifies the feelings that go with that experience. And I'm not a neuropsych person, but that may be because we've got these like mirror neurons where we mirror what others around us are doing and feeling. Girls in particular have been shown to kind of have this social contagion effect, where if they have eating disorder behaviors or risks and they get online in another pod of girls, they're sharing information and encouraging other in harmful behaviors. And it becomes a social phenomenon that they're passing on. Yes.
Can they do that? Is that something that would be considered a part of text chat? Like where
it could be in a text situation. They've seen it back in the days when people would go on discussion boards and things. Some of that research was done, but socially, especially at this age, because developmentally, teenagers, the area in their brain that has social rewards is enlarged during the teen years. And so it's social. I mean, you see it, right? Like they're walking down the street all dressed the same because what other people think around them matters so much at that age. Another example, this isn't research, so I want to qualify that. It's from The Atlantic, a story last year that was told about young people who had gone online on TikTok and were watching videos about Tourette's. And on TikTok in particular, they go down these rabbit holes where it keeps feeding them the same type of video one after another. And young people who had been on watching these Tourette's videos started developing tics. And it wasn't Tourette's, but it was a neurological condition that they couldn't stop. And so they had to get psychiatric care for these tics they had developed watching them online. So that's an Atlantic article. It hasn't been documented in the research yet, but sometimes things come out quicker in the news than they do in the research world. Another one, problematic internet use. We don't talk about addiction at this age because it's really, really rare that there's a true addiction going on. We talk about problematic internet use, and that's things like, I don't want to be online, but I feel compelled to be online. It's things like, I'm really irritated. Maybe you've seen this. I'm really irritated when I get off the computer or the internet. It's things like, I'm not getting enough sleep because I'm using my phone at night, or I'm sneaking around to try to get up in the middle of the night and get on the computer because I don't have my phone, but there's a computer in the office. So all those types of behaviors are signs that there's problematic internet behavior, and it's kind of the forerunner to, a potential addiction. And it's really getting in the way of their healthy development at that point. The last thing I want to highlight, and this is like brand new research that started coming out in January of this year. There was a study of neuroimaging of the brain, and teenagers who had been checking their phones constantly were more likely to have that social reward area of their brain that's already kind of heightened during teenage years, even larger than the rest. We don't know the direction of that effect. We don't know if it was all that screen time causing that, or if kids who have a larger, area of their brain tended to use that. But the Surgeon General came out with a report shortly after that and said, with everything else, we don't give a kid toys until it's been thoroughly tested before we release it to the public. But with the internet, we're releasing it to the public before we know what the direction of the effect is. So we need to proceed with caution. And there's the American Psychological Society, the Surgeon General, both came out with reports earlier this year saying we need to put the brakes on and be a lot more cautious than we've been. All right.
Question.
Yeah.
About screen time. Are you talking about like phones and devices and going on sites? Or are you talking about watching a football game with your dad?
Yeah, so all of that is included in the general category of screen time. And a lot of times researchers will narrow it down to social media. And the Surgeon General's report is more specifically about social media. But before everyone walked in, we were talking about the differences between girls and boys. And one of the reasons I don't like focusing just on the social media is because our boys are watching videos on YouTube more often and going on video games. And there's problems in that area as well. But we tend to, in our society, monitor the girls much more than we do the boys. So if we say screen time more generally or technology more generally, then I think we're including the boys more than if we just focus on the social pieces. Does that make sense? So
are you talking about like watching programs on TV with your family? Or are you thinking about like stuff that you can choose and control?
So when it depends on the study that I'm talking about. The studies, and so I've kind of distinguished between the general screen time and the social media on some of these. And on average, they collapse a lot of that. And we do, and you'll see in a moment, we suggest you do the positive together media because there's a lot of teaching moments in that. So I think what you're getting at is there's positive experiences with media, and anytime that there's parental monitoring, like you're watching a TV show with your dad or a football game with your dad, then there's a level of oversight that is going to ensure that it's a more healthy experience. So I would distinguish not between the type of experience, but between the oversight and the lack of oversight. In terms, and we're actually going to dig into that now. Because I've gone through some of the risks and they're a little scary, but I strongly believe that parents make a huge difference in kids' life. And it doesn't always feel like it because they spend like the next 6 years of your life pushing you away. And that's totally developmentally normal and good because we do want them to eventually like be independent and on their own. And that's part of that process. But so it feels like they're not listening. It feels like it doesn't matter. But I guarantee you, the relationship you have with them and the times that you spend together with them, even when it doesn't sound like they're listening, even when they're pushing back at you, makes a world of difference. And that's something that is hugely consistent in the research literature. Parents and the relationship, the warm and firm relationship with their parents makes all the difference in the world. So thank you for being here. And thank you for thinking through this intentionally, because it does make a difference. So with that, what is working well in your home with technology use? Because I am guessing a lot of you already have really good things in place that are working for you. So I'd love to just take a minute and like hear some of those so everybody else in the room can brainstorm some ideas.
We have such a limited time for them to be on their screens because they're school and homework and sports.
Yeah.
And so like they really don't have that much time, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
But the little time that they have, it's so like I gotta do my chores as fast as I can so I can just get on this screen, you know.
Yeah.
Especially my fifth grader, when I say your time is up, he's doing the, you know, the anger and really irritated, like,
Yeah.
you know, like,
Yeah.
So well, this is not.
Yeah. So super motivated by technology.
Yes.
And just another my dissertation was actually on the longitudinal effects of kids being involved. And we found that in high school, if you were actively involved in like a sport or extracurricular, when you were 27 to 28 years old, you were doing better in life. So I had this longitudinal data set. So getting kids involved, definitely a win because it keeps them away from the tech and it develops other things that help them later in life. Yeah.
We do.
Either one.
We do like, and we've done this since my kids were little. We do like a family media time every night.
Yeah.
It's sometimes 5 minutes. It depends on how long it really takes to get ready, but sometimes it's half an hour.
Yeah.
And maybe it's educational in a sense of watching videos, documentaries. We watch a lot of nature documentaries, and for the last 5 years or so, we've been watching space documentaries.
Yeah.
So my son's really learned so much about different things, and it's just kind of like choosing shows, and then we watch them over a long period.
Yeah. And I love hearing that because it used to be that there was a lot more of that naturally because we had one TV box in the house and then everybody would sit down together and watch at the end of the night. But now we have these little devices and people split off and go to the different areas of the room. And so if you can foster that type of an experience, it's the bonding that happens there and it's the teaching moments, which we'll talk about in a second. Yeah, you had another.
Yeah, so the things that we do, there's some things that work and some things we're still like ironing out and trying to figure out. So we have all computers set up that when kids are on, if they want to request to visit the site and it's not one of those that comes directly to us, we can't go on it until they approve it.
Yeah.
Found some things there where I don't know, you probably saw years ago, there was this thing with like YouTube Kids where these videos will be advertised as like kid videos and like at first glance they look like kid videos. These were very
And then it was like a catfish, yeah. Yeah.
Fortunately, we didn't run into that. Like it's things like that which can be around parental controls.
Yeah.
That still poses a problem. And because the kids are also unsuspecting. Then if you have an older kid who maybe is trying to figure out how to drown them, it's just full of things.
Yeah. And almost any of our kids, if they want to get around our controls, they can. They have so much more time and energy on their hands to figure out technology than we do. And so I always say that it's really at the end of the day, the most important thing is our relationship because we're always like 10 steps behind our kids. So I want to walk you through the tech parenting framework because it's an easy acronym to kind of think through some of the basic principles that promote healthy technology use. And one is just talking to kids about what they're doing online. Like they're clearly hugely motivated by being online and enjoy a lot of times being online. So just being interested in that and curious, striking that tone of just like casual conversation, and then not grilling them, and then really watching it. If they tell us something that we're like, whoa, I don't know about that, and we can feel that flight or fight in us, that anxiety rising, holding our tongues, right? Like holding our tongue and taking a deep breath and maintaining that curiosity and getting them. So tell me, like, what do you think about that? How do you like, how does that feel to you? And keeping them talking as much as possible, which, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when they feel like we're interested in them, it's very rewarding. When they feel like we're lecturing them, they will stay the crap away from us, you know? So talking to your kids about that, the media is just a way to kind of get that conversation started and to create that bonding. The next one is explicitly educating them about the risks online. And that might be pictures. What happens to a picture if you send it? This is one that my therapist colleagues see a lot. If there's an embarrassing or kind of a risque picture that gets sent in a moment when everything's okay, and then in a moment of revenge that gets sent around to everybody, or just like a, hey, look at this. And one of our interviews, a girl was on vacation in a bikini spring break, sent it to a friend sent it to another. The whole school had seen it when she came back. And the definition of sexual harassment is that it creates a hostile environment and you can't concentrate. So she came back to school and couldn't concentrate because she had felt like she felt exposed. Everybody had seen her in a bikini and was talking about her. So educating your kids on what happens once that photo leaves their phone, educating them about the media, the advertisers and being critiquing the messages that they're seeing, showing you something that they think isn't appropriate, and just being really kind of intentional, maybe educating them about that magnifying effect, to stay away from the internet when you're in a crappy mood, because it's just going to magnify how you feel. And then this is what I think you were getting at earlier, when you said, yeah, but what if they're watching with their parents? And I give you a thumbs up if you're doing that. I encourage that. Like, get on Snapchat and do those stupid filters together and laugh together. You know, sit down and watch a half hour of memes or a cool nature show. Sitting down together with them gives you opportunities for teaching moments to come up where you can ask them, like, in that scene, you know, like they had this huge party, but there weren't any consequences. Like, what do you think it would be like in real life, you know? And that together and experiencing things together is really important. Friending them on social media so you can kind of monitor who they're interacting with, another great strategy. So using and co-using together is exactly what we do want to see. One of the challenges with media is that so much of the monitoring is done in secret, right? Like it's kind of covert and it's almost like spying on our kids. Whereas monitoring in real life is, in all of the research, it's very effective and it reduces teen risk, but it requires conversation. Who are you going out tonight with? Like, when are you going to be home? What are you guys doing? Are their parents home? It all requires words face to face. But online, too often we've reverted to this covert spying technique, and it just doesn't work as well as the conversation. So if you can get those conversations out in front and do the monitoring by watching things together, it works better.
What do you mean by that? The behind the scenes monitor, like we're doing that?
So
Versus a face.
yeah, so parents, so in the research, monitoring face to face is all positive with kids' outcomes. In the technology literature and the technology research, when parents are doing technology control, like using software to monitor their kids and only online restrictions, it's mixed. And especially with the older kids, there's actually backlash and there's negative outcomes instead of positive outcomes. Some of the outcomes are still positive, some of them aren't. So there's this mixed effect. And what the distinction in the literature is that when it's autonomy building and you're helping your kids make their own smart decisions, that the control is positive. You know, you have a family conversation around what time should all of our family be offline, and everybody weighs in. So their autonomy is respected, and then the family agrees, and you all get off at that time. That works. But if we're going to set this and this is what you're going to do, and it's top down, it seems to have a backfiring effect in the research we've seen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and our situation is that the kid's dad and I are divorced.
Just
And so
challenging.
The more autonomy conversation face to face, and he is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
He's monitoring, he's in their face, telling them to get off. They come to me all stressed out because he's like constantly. So we kind of are we're both very different things, and I
Yeah.
think it's good that we're both doing what we're doing. But I just think that I see more positive results doing it more.
Yeah. You took two of the handouts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's I'm gonna share some
Notes for him.
Yeah. I have and I'm going to share some websites that you can share too, that also give some tips on that. But there's a family media plan that I'll show you in a bit, where you can, and that's the last piece of the tech acronyms, is that house rules and creating house rules together. And so if there's a way to do some co-parenting around house rules, and I know that's not always possible, but that's a valuable process of talking about what are our values, and we're agreeing on this together. And that I'll show you the website, but the American Academy of Pediatrics has a family media plan where they walk you through all these different options and get you to think about, what does our family want for this area of media, safety and values. So I'll show you that website in a second. I'm just going to mention briefly, we're developing like modules that also walk parents through different exercises around what are your values and where's your kid at, and what do you want to do around these issues, around these 4 areas of tech parenting. And those will be piloted this fall. We're holding our breath until we get the approval to pilot those. Because of the research around cyberbullying, I wanted to just briefly say, if they are cyberbullied, stop, take a screenshot before you turn off so you have a record of what happened, share with an adult. And that's where, if you're already talking about this, the conversation's a little easier. Kids often hide their internet behavior, including cyberbullying, when they think the parents are going to take away the social media or the internet. And then I started at Florida, like just a few months after the Parkland shooting. Everywhere where I went in Florida, there was the sign, if you see something, say something. And I think my big takeaway is putting that into place before a big incident happens is so critical, right? Restricting inappropriate mature content does work. It reduces risk for youth substance use. Actively talking with children, this is research we conducted, it's under review right now, but talking with kids was reduced social media efficacy, or poor social efficacy, reduced risk for poor social efficacy. So their social skills were better. Their parents talked with them, and it improved their mental health. That was a longitudinal study. They want help managing their devices, and the parent-child relationships at the end of the day are the most protective thing we have for our children. thinking about what's age appropriate, what's appropriate for an 11-year-old is going to be very different than a 15-year-old, which is very different than an 18-year-old. One of our parents talked about, it's like training wheels. You need the training wheels when you're first learning to ride, or like getting a license. You need a permit and you need practice with supervision at first. And then once you get older and more experienced, you want to be able to do this on your own. And I always tell parents of older kids, you kind of want them to have a few years to manage this stuff by themselves while they're still in the house, if you can. So by the time they're 16, 17, giving them rein to make mistakes. Because one of my colleagues found that kids who had the autonomy to make their own mistakes learned how to fix them. And kids who didn't have that control in their lives didn't learn how to fix the mistakes, right? Having that balance. And then we don't necessarily have to restrict all of the screens. I think this was also what you were getting. It's not necessarily that you have to, the screens are bad and we have to restrict all screens. It's restricting the mature content and increasing the monitored time with an adult, especially for middle school age kids. Just a few questions we get from caregivers. We do know that clear house rules make a difference. And when there's parents that have a more assertive parenting style, reduced the amount of negotiation time, like going back and forth. And some parents use negotiation as teachable moments. So that's something to keep in mind. Creating that family media plan. This is the website. It's healthychildren.org. And it's the American Pediatric Association Family Media Plan. If you just Google that, it'll come up. And then Common Sense Media. These are a couple of our very favorite resources to send parents to. Be careful with the technology because of that double-edged sword I mentioned. If you're using technology to control and spy on your kids, it could very well backfire. I suggest staying away from all of those apps up there that say spy. Disney Circle can be pretty good, but kids get around it pretty quickly. So it's better maybe for younger kids. Bark is one that I think is interesting because it uses algorithms to scan for potential problem phrases like about substance abuse or eating disorders or drug use, and it'll alert parents only if it sees those problem situations. And if kids are online, 5 to 8 hours a day, parents just don't have time to keep up with it. So the algorithm does. And there's a Bark phone as well. Microsoft Family and Apple also now have monitoring. And so it sounds like some of you are already using that. But the young, especially for the younger middle school kids, just really being conscious of using the limits and the mature content limits is really important. I feel like we've had a little bit of conversation, but what other questions or sticky situations have come up for you?
I'm going to ask about the last point on there that we didn't talk about.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you for pointing that out. So there's a lot of these apps that the kids use that have a default to have the location tracking on. And among the college age set, it's normal for them to be tracking like 20, 30 people's locations at any given time. And so sometimes younger kids get pulled into these trends that older, young adults are doing. This is one we want them to make sure any app that they have on their phone, you want to go into the location tracking of the settings. I know on Apple, you can go into the location tracking for every app, make sure it's turned off so that there's no one nefarious that could be tracking their location, or even like, the guy so-and-so last week, like that somebody liked last week and now sent the picture around. You don't want that person tracking where they're at either, right?
I wish they would turn the default to always off and you have to turn it on. But it's really annoying. So like you literally have to turn it off for everything. Like
Yeah.
it should be opposite.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer that yes, we need to be talking to parents and yes, we need to be talking to kids, but we need to fix some of those systemic issues with talking to our representatives and talking to our government, and because it's kind of like, if you look back 50 to 100 years ago, this was an example that was given in the book Stolen Focus, which is a fascinating read. But people back then, you didn't see a lot of obesity because the environment, wasn't a fast food chain on every corner. But we've told people that you are responsible for what you put in your mouth, and you have a poor willpower if if you have a problem with what you eat. But the reality is the environment is really hard to manage. And the same thing is true with our kids and the attention. That's another issue that we're seeing is kids' lack of attention, our adult lack of attention. And it's the environment. So yes, as parents, we are the first line of defense for our kids and control a certain amount of their environment. But I think we also need to be talking, it's a both and approach. We need to be talking to the systems that are setting this negative environment up for our kids.
Good question. Do any of these apps that you talk about on there, are any of them able to scan like GChat or something? I really struggle with whether or not to check.
Bark might. I'm not. If Bark can actually scan quite a bit, but I don't think they could go into Snapchat when I was using it.
No,
But,
no.
yeah.
We don't allow social media, but
Yeah.
the GChats are just added most of the time.
Yeah.
They on their school computer, and they have these
Well,
giant.
and I don't think it would allow you to do it on the school computer either. But we did interviews with administrators, parents, and youth. And that is an issue across middle schools right now. These huge chats of all these kids, unmonitored in most cases. And so anything we can do to monitor and to share across parents and to share with our administrators about what we're seeing, if our kids are sharing, and none of the kids want to be the narc, right? But emphasizing the need to share if there's something going on, and maybe giving some specific examples. There was an incident in another school district where somebody had been talking about suicide and then did commit suicide, and kids had seen the previous messaging, but nobody said anything. So you can imagine like just the guilt that they were wrapped up. And so that's that, like educating them about risks, how critical it is to tell an adult when you see something, say something, and giving an example of like Parkland or an example like that, telling stories that will stick in their mind about why it's so important to tell an adult, because you don't want to be racked with guilt afterwards.
I love that because I actually had this amazing situation in the middle of high school here. And she wasn't on social media. She got caught up in this thing anyway without her knowledge. So there were these accounts on Instagram at the time called like our ships, and sort of like middle schoolers were pretending to like instantly become a relationship. And somehow someone was impersonating my daughter online, and got called out for something they said. And whoever was impersonating her then like online was threatening to harm themselves. And it resulted in someone who knew my daughter and thought it was her and was very concerned, said something to his mom. The mom called the police. And said, my daughter is literally on third and times. She was but she wasn't even part of it. And it's this whole thing where she didn't want to go to school the next day because everyone online thought it was her.
Right. I've heard, like in the interviews we did this last spring, we heard 3 or 4 huge incidents like that where there was catfishing at this age. And so that's another risk to talk to them about, like, the dangers of catfishing. And unfortunately, we can't control if somebody else is catfishing, but we can teach like self-regulation, coping skills. And sometimes in those situations, that's all we can do.
Well,
which is
and
so
at
hard.
the end of the day, I was like grateful for the way it played out, because if it had been my daughter, like they found me,
Right.
had me on the phone.
Yeah.
within 10 minutes of this happening,
Yeah,
right? So I was actually grateful, and it opened up a bit of conversation. with God,
Yeah.
And then also kind of opened my eyes to like what can happen even when the kid isn't my mom.
yeah, and
social media.
yeah, I'm grateful that it was a positive experience at the end. I've heard some of the horror stories, like there was a student of color who got blamed for catfished for a bomb threat and had police come search their home. And it wasn't them that had written the note, it was a catfish. So like that's a big one that I heard a lot of stories this last spring, at least 3 or 4 big incidents like that. And we only talked to a handful of kids. We didn't talk to a ton. So
Can you talk more about, maybe the American Pediatrics website is gonna tell me how to do this, but how you can convince kids that they don't need so much screen time? Because if we have the family chat, my kids will be like, yes, I need 9 hours a day, so.
yeah. So I really like a technique called motivational interviewing. And I think it works pretty well. It probably works a little better with older kids, but they're just developing their prefrontal cortex and their reasoning skills. And so if we tell them what the right answer is, and we all do this, right? Like I know I do. If somebody tells me what to do, I'm right there resisting. Right? And so we dig into our position more. But instead, asking questions, open-ended questions, and then like being curious about the responses. And they know, like if you get them talking, they know when it's not healthy for them. And then asking them, like just really listening and empathizing, and it's kind of amazing how it works. They start to come up with their own solutions. They'll start calling the parents out, is what they'll start doing. This is what I noticed about you, mom and dad, right? But sometimes that's also like, yeah, like maybe our family should kind of think about that a little bit, right? And then another thing that people do in this motivational interviewing technique is that they contrast what the kids' goals are or what anybody's goals are. I use this like on everybody I know. It's terrible. Good listening, right? But like what, so like what kind of grades are you hoping to get this year? And it's a new school year. Like what's your plans for the year? And then like what's going to get you there? And do you think you're doing that right now? And sometimes there's so it sounds like you really want this, but you're also wanting to spend extra time online. What should we do about, what do you think we should do about that as a family? How could we support you? Right? But I think that kind of line of reasoning works really well because it's inviting people to have autonomy over their own thinking process around these things. And it doesn't always work, but it's just really good listening skills and repeating back to people in a like honest way does miracles. It really does. And then praising for you do catching them being good. Like when your kids were toddlers and they were just starting to walk, and every time they did something like they stood up, you're like, and like, what do we do with our teens? When's the last time you were like, pretty rare compared to when they were toddlers. So we suggest, and this is like really well backed in the research, a ratio of about 4 or 5 positives to 1 critique. And we tend to do the opposite, and that's totally normal because our brains focus in on the negatives, and we kind of think, you're old enough to know what you should be doing. But in reality, to create a positive, creative environment where we share resources, we need about a 4 or 5 positives to 1 negative ratio. That's across humanity. Other questions? I think we just have a couple more minutes, right?
We could talk about this stuff.
Oh, let's see. We started at 6:30.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's been about an hour.
Do you have that presentation available to send, or is it?
Into a PDF and send it to you. Yeah, that's no problem.
And you're recording it for your colleagues.
Oh, recording and I'll put it in a Dropbox for you too. So, yeah, I just, I don't know how well, you can check and see if people. I'm actually going to end the recording. Okay, bye people at home.